talking about decisions. All right. Hebrews chapter number 11, verse number 24 is where I'll begin from the New King James Version. This is what it reads. It says, by faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. For he looked to the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians attempting to do so were drowned. All of this was done, obviously, by faith. With that in mind, what I see here, and when I look at this text, it looks as though when we consider what Moses is doing here, when we consider what Moses is doing in this text, when we consider that, we realize that he's making decision after decision after decision. So today I want to talk about decisions. I want to talk about that for just a few moments, if you will allow me to do so. When we are looking at this, and the one thing I want you to recognize and know is that inaction is probably the most reckless action anybody could ever take. When we look at this, when we look at inaction is a reckless action that leaves no action subject to any action. I think it's important to know and recognize and understand that life is filled with demands for decision. It's amazing on how when we talk about decision-making processes and when we have to make decisions, we fail to realize oftentimes that really our conclusion and our deliverances are really based upon oftentimes just decisions we make. God has already blessed us with the power. He's blessed us with the strength. He's blessed us with the capacity. He's blessed us with his hand of might and his hand of strength. He's already done that. What we have to do is make a decision. And life is filled with decisions. And I'll say it again. Inaction is a reckless action that leaves no action subject to any action. And when we look at this, it's in these key moments of decision making that a sufficient level of emotional intelligence, it has to be applied. And not only emotional intelligence, but also faith is required here to both make and stick with the decision. Emotional intelligence is necessary because within the construct of a key moment, there are various considerations. When we talk about these considerations, we're talking about events and thoughts and feelings and behaviors and actions and consequences, because all of those dynamics within the scope of the entire process of decision making are necessary to consider when making a decision: events, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, actions, and consequences. And so with this progressive list filled with attitudes and actions, because that's what this list is, it's filled with attitudes and actions. With this progressive list filled with those attitudes and actions, it is of paramount importance that knee-jerk miscalculations and unnecessary expedition are avoided. In other words, you don't need to just make a decision just off the cuff. I was sharing with Dr. Bridget Franklin yesterday, and Bridge and I were talking, and I told Bridge she was about to make a decision regarding relocation, and she had some things in her heart that were really tugging at her, and she was about to make a decision off the things in her heart. And I told her, I said, the last thing you want to do, Bridge, is you don't want to pull a thought out of your feelings. Here's the thing. One of my friends, Pastor Garrison up there in Dallas, Texas, over there in Dallas, Texas, Pastor Garrison has a sign in his office that reads like this. He says, in life, there are no makeup exams. Choose carefully. When we look at this, it's important to recognize, and I'll drop a footnote here, how many of us have made decisions in an instant that have left you wondering if it will take an eternity to overcome? Decisions. We cannot make knee-jerk miscalculations and unnecessary expeditions in our decision making. When I say unnecessary expeditions, what kills me is that people just begin, they'll make a choice, they'll make a decision, and they'll go and run with it, and they will not have calculated anything about the decision other than the fact they were feeling that way at that time, therefore they decided. Listen, we have to be careful not to get caught up in this society's demand for instant gratification. We live in a man, listen, I heard Bishop T.D. Jakes the other day and just talking about this whole entitlement thing and how we have such a society of entitlement and everybody wants their way. I mean, they try to be slick with it. They try to be covert and say, no, that's not really what I'm doing. That's not really what I'm trying to do. No, that's exactly what you're doing. But we have to be careful not to get caught up in the demands of today's society as it relates to instant gratification. And Paul makes it very clear here when he says, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. And the reality is this, is that we live in this world, but our mentality, our methodology, and our mode of operation, all of those things should be out of this world. I wonder if you're following what I'm saying here. We do live in this world. But how we think and what we do, all of those things should be out of this world. So here's the thing. With this decision-making process, it's important to understand that this list that I just spoke about, the events, and just like even what just took place right now, I'm in an event. I have a thought about it. I have a feeling about it. There's a behavior that I've got to adjust, and then there's an action that I've got to take. And either I'm going to take an action or I'm not going to take an action because there are going to be consequences that are going to be connected to it, right? So with that in mind, and I hope you guys can tune your minds back in with me and share with me here for just a few moments here. We have to be careful not to get caught up in this society's mindset of instant gratification. And so with that in mind, it's important to know, realize, and understand that when we are in a society that demands instant gratification, you have to be careful not to be moved so quickly on and about everything. I need you to understand here that oftentimes people will try to get you to move very quickly. And I've said this in times past. Oftentimes I have said on how whenever someone demands an answer from me, it's always going to be no. Because oftentimes what happens is the no slows them down long enough to realize that I'm going to take my time before I make a decision about anything, and I don't have to give a yes as quickly as you want it because I have not had time to think about watch this, my payment is going to be inside of the yes that I give you that I have not thought about. The bamboozlement and hoodwinking, that you fail to realize that when we look at what we're looking at, even on the social media platforms, all this stuff that we see people doing and all this stuff that we see people having, we start trying to make decisions based on what we're seeing on social media. But I want you to understand that there's a bamboozlement and hoodwinking there because we fail to realize that what you're seeing is what they want you to see. That's not necessarily what it is. And so here's the thing. You've got to understand. Watch this. There's more to a marriage than a wedding. And you see all the big pretty weddings, right? There's more to being grown than having a job. There's more to life than living for right now. And here's the real deal. You nor I actually have a world that anybody cares about but us. In this world, here's the thing. You'll have to learn. I've had to learn. We've all had to learn. If you do not learn how to make decisions, you are going to be in a perpetual need for deliverance and a perpetual cycle of dilemma because decisions are not made. And not only that, we have to learn quickly that they potentially impact more than just us. So the decisions that we make oftentimes, and Lord, I wish I had had this understanding years ago on how important decisions are, because they don't just impact us. They don't just impact who we are and what we do. They impact other people, right? Sometimes some of us can say it today. I mean, you ought to tell the truth today. Some of us can say, I would have done some things differently if I had considered the consequences of my actions and how it would impact other people. I would have said some things differently, or I wouldn't have said some things, or I would have gone another way if I would have really understood the impact of my actions upon other people. Not only will your decisions require some emotional intelligence, I want to digress for a moment, but they will also require sufficient measure of faith. I'm going to the text, y'all hang on with me. I just want to set this up because we're talking about decisions here, right? Our decision to hold fast to, I was listening to my pastor, Dr. Andre Jermaine Lewis, this morning. He was talking about that in our praise and in our worship, our decision to hold fast to our praise and our worship is because we have decided that our praise and worship is not connected to my situation, but my praise and my worship is connected to who I know. It's not connected to my situation. So therefore, my praise and my worship is not up and down. It's not situational. It's not circumstantial. And I think there are a lot of people who are spiritually delusional who suggest and believe and feel that they can always keep their level of praise or always keep their level of worship toward God at a steady, stable level. But the truth of the matter is there are a whole lot of people whose praise and worship goes up and down based upon the situation. You can watch their energy level. You can watch their movement and their motion. And it's not that we are not to be dealing with the humanistic elements of emotion when we find ourselves in context. But there ought to be an anchoring somewhere in our soul that we have made a decision within our minds that we're going to hold fast to the faith in which we have, not in the thing, but in Him. Here it is as I get ready to get off into this text. Our decision here to hold fast to our praise and our worship and our faith is not based upon our situation or what it's connected to, but it's based upon who we know. Moving into this text, as we look at the pericope of this passage, it shows us how Abraham and others, including Moses, faced many decisions along their walk in life. They faced a lot of decisions. When we look at this hall of faith, the common denominator among all of them is that all of them completely relied on the promise of God. When we look at Hebrews chapter number 11 here, here's the thing. The one thing about it, they all had many decisions to make in their lives. But the one thing we know is that they all completely relied on the promise of God. Not the promise itself, because there's a whole lot of people that can make promises. There's a whole lot of people who will make promises, but those promises will fail. Those promises will run short. Those promises will not be fulfilled simply because of the potential fallibility of man. Even with the greatest intention, you can still mess around and miss the mark. But they relied totally on the promise of God. And so with that in mind, it's important to understand this. Maybe some of us face decision difficulties because relying on God's promise is not as desirable as working on our own. Woo! Yeah, see, we have to have it figured out. We have to see the calculation. We got to know what the bottom line is because, listen, it's amazing on how everybody is filled with faith and everybody is full of faith as long as things are as steady as they need to be so that you can remain as mentally comfortable as possible. I'm coming after it today. Decision making. Abraham and Sarah were promised a son in their old age. Can I talk a little bit about this? They were promised a son in their old age and still had to wait 25 years. Let's face it, waiting is one of the most difficult disciplines for all of us, if we tell the truth today, especially in today's culture of instant interventions, microwavable miracles, and automatic answers. But true faith is the ability, this is what true faith is. It's the ability to wait for God's purpose to be fulfilled in God's time. It's to wait for God's purpose to be fulfilled in God's time, not our time. Here's the X factor. The X factor is this. While we're waiting, we also must be obeying. Abraham obeyed when he didn't know where he was going. I'm working up to Moses. Y'all hang on with me. Abraham obeyed when he didn't know where he was going. He lived in tents. When we look at this entire text, the pericope, the whole text, he lived in tents because he had become a stranger and a pilgrim in the world and needed to be ready to move when God spoke. Ooh, let me see here. Let me drop a footnote right here and see if I can't bless you, because this is something I think that many of us need to understand. Tent dwellers and home builders don't mix well. I'll say it again. Tent dwellers and home builders don't mix well. Someone's asking why. Well, I'm glad you asked. Because one desires to be settled, while another never desires to be settled on this side. Ooh. Yeah, Abraham showed us that we have to learn to live in the future tense. You have to learn to live in the future tense. He obeyed without knowing when God would fulfill his promises. In my studies, Dr. George Morrison, a Scottish preacher, this is what he once said. The important thing, and I quote, the important thing is not what we live in, but what we look for. I'll say it again so you don't miss the shout. He says the important thing is not what we live in, but it is what we look for, unquote. Moses' parents, let me jump to Moses right quick. Moses' parents, Amram and Jochebed, they were people who had great faith. Something to note here is that faith cannot be passed down. Now, Amram and Jochebed, they were people of great faith, but faith is not something that can be passed down to generations like family traits. You can't pass faith down. However, what can happen is that parents, and if I have some parents on here with some yet still formidable children, you need to recognize that parents, you can't pass the trait of faith down, but what you can do is set an atmosphere of faith at the home and be examples to the children. Husbands, you can't pass faith over to your wife, and wife, you can't pass faith over to your husband. What you can do is set an example, and not just one in word, but one in work. Set that example and an atmosphere of faith at home, and be that example for those children or for that spouse or for those families or friends. Ain't no sense in you wondering what's wrong with young people today. I mean, when all you have to do is check the house. Yeah, if something's wrong in the house, check the house, right? With that in mind, Moses' faith, let me show you something here. It was not passed down to him. However, his faith was cultivated. Woo. It was cultivated even as a baby by the atmosphere he was born in. Now, why do I bring up him as a baby by the atmosphere he was born in? Because it shows us here that if I could contemporize this thought process, he knew more about Jesus than Jay-Z. He knew about Christ before he knew about Cardi B. I'm just trying to give you some contemporary thought processes here. Everyone I know, when we see here where Moses as a baby was cultivating this atmosphere, because the text says when he became of age, when he became of age. Before I unpack that, I want you to know that everyone I know wants both a peaceful and fulfilling life, right? Everyone I know wants both a peaceful and fulfilling life. But nevertheless, most people that I know feel that in some way life does not cooperate with their desire. I'm pulling back and showing you something contemporaneously. I dropped you off at Moses getting ready to become age, and then I put a pause right there because I want to make sure I hit this point. Everybody I know, they want a peaceful and fulfilling life. But the problem is, most folk I know, they feel that life doesn't cooperate with their desire. Can I tell you oftentimes why life does not cooperate with your desire? It oftentimes does not cooperate with your desire because it is based on your decision. Life keeps setting up barriers. Like the only way to get peace and fulfillment when you are dealing with these different barriers or issues or challenges or trials, and when life is not cooperating with your desires, the only way to get that peace and that fulfillment is to make the right decisions about how you're going to conduct your life. Because what we have now is that we have a whole lot of people who are operating from the ideology that life is wagging the liver. That's us, liver, those of us who are living. Life is not supposed to wag the living. Living is supposed to wag the life. In other words, those of us who are living make the life. We don't let the life make the living. Woo! Look at this. We can't control what happens to us, but we can determine the principles that we live by. Oh, preach, McNeil. The fact is, our life is the sum total of our decisions. What you do today is a sum total of your decision. What you do tomorrow is a sum total of your decision. And we like to try to say, well, and we love to put everything on God. And I mean, we should totally rely on God. We should totally trust God, and we should totally offer reverence and be reverential when it comes to the sovereignty of God, his ability and capacity to do what he wants, when he wants, where he wants, how he wants, as long as he wants. But there is a certain amount of responsibility that falls on our shoulders. Come on, somebody type on my shoulders. No, just type it's on me. Type it's on me. Somebody just type it's on me. You have to know that there are certain things that listen, we can't control what happens to us. But what we can do is determine the principles by which we live based upon whatever that is that happens. So guess what? If you're in the valley, it does not matter what has taken place that has put you there. You make a decision on whether or not you're staying. Week before last, I preached, Lord, deliver me from a double mind. Right? Because a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. And so therefore, the fact is, our life is the sum total of our decisions. Why is this so important? I'm glad you asked. I'm getting out of here in just a few moments. Some decisions are momentous and some are trivial. Every decision is not a momentous decision. That's one thing I tell people all the time. I had to share this with some of my colleagues the other day. Stop making it so much harder than it has to be. It's not as difficult as you're making it out to be. It is far more trivial than it is momentous. Some are easy. Some decisions are easy and some decisions are hard. Every day of our life, here's the thing. And I'm concerned with decisionless making people. When you don't know how to make decisions, I don't know how you made it through life, because every day of our life is filled with decisions. The question is, how can we make good decisions? That's the question. How can we make good decisions? If every day, Brother Pastor, if you're telling me every day of my life is filled with decisions, then I need to know how to make good decisions. Because I think all of us can probably raise our hand right here and say that we've all made decisions, but they have not always been the best. So I want to look at Moses here. Let's look at the life of Moses as it's summarized here by the author of Hebrews, because we find that fundamental decisions will determine the quality of our life. Just fundamental decisions. It says, by faith, verse 24, Moses, when he became of age, the first decision he made was he refused. Right? But before I get to him making the decision that he refused, we've got to look at that became of age. What does that mean when he became of age? You know, in the Jewish customs, I believe it's 13 years old where they have the bar mitzvah, and the Jewish society pronounces upon the boy that he has become a man, or a bat mitzvah. You can have bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, right? In the Jewish society, that's how that happens. The society pronounces upon him at a certain age that he becomes a man. And that's good, fine, and well. And I'm going to show you some tension in my thought process here in just a moment. That's good, fine, and well that you show that he becomes a man. You say that he becomes a man because he's aged out of childhood. Now, in the Roman history, there is a ceremony called Romanthelia. Romanthelia, and Romanthelia is when the little boy or the boy that is moving into manhood and the girl that's moving into womanhood, when they are ready, they pronounce to those in their homes or those in their families that they are ready. And when they are ready, the little boy that would play with the little ball and the little girl that would play with the little doll, the family would gather around and take them to the theater. And this is called Romanthelia. And they would take them to the theater. And watch this, you all. The little boy who has now determined that he's ready to move into manhood, and the little girl who's determined that she's ready to move into womanhood, they take their instruments of play. The little boy takes the ball and he throws it at the theater screen. The little girl takes the doll and she throws it at the theater screen, and everybody erupts into a massive cheer. Somebody saying, Pastor, what are you talking about? I'm glad you asked, because here's the point. When you talk about becoming of age, the little boy who had the ball in his hand, when he threw it at the theater screen, he pronounced to everyone that I no longer need this toy because I am no longer a boy. I wish I had somebody who, when the girl threw the doll at the theater screen, she made the proclamation and pronouncement that I no longer am in need of this toy because I am now no longer a girl, but I am a woman. Now, here's what I'm saying. Oftentimes, what many people have had issues with in their life is that they look like they're ready because society has said that you ought to be at a certain age where you ought to know better, do better, and be better, etc., etc. And you start making decisions about your life, but you have a lacking maturity in the area of the decision that you're making, which produces consequences that are undesirable, which causes you to deal, watch this, with further decision making that until you mature through the consequences will be repeated over and over again. Preach to yourself, McNeil. I wish I had somebody in here with me today. Moses became of age. And here's the thing I need you to understand. You need to understand this. This is about maturity. This is about understanding that the decisions I make, I have to deal with them. The decisions I make, I have to be responsible for them. The decisions and that's why only people who are mature, not who are old, not who are aged, not who are of a certain chronological number. No. People who are, listen, you don't need to make no decisions if you're not mature enough to make them. Watch this. If you can't underwrite the decision you make, you probably need not make it. Huh? But Moses, when he became of age, when he was fully mature, look what he did. He refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. So how do we make good decisions, Pastor? I'm glad you asked. Give me about 15 minutes. We're out of here. Like Moses, what we have to do, first of all, is that we've got to choose God's plan over our own. Yeah, because that's what Moses did here. The plan of our own making, it'll please us more. Yeah, the things that we want to do will please us more. the plan of our own making can even make us seem more sensible, right? Because, God says go left, but I'm looking at everything to the right. So it makes more sense to go to the right, right? But Moses, I'm talking about making good decisions. If life is filled every day with decisions, I think it's incumbent upon us to look at this particular roadmap that Moses leaves us and figure out how to make good decisions. First of all, he chooses God's plan over his own. The plan of our own making, it will please us more. Because guess what? You'll always go with yourself. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's very rarely will you find yourself fighting against yourself. Right? Not only that, the plan of our own making may please us more. The plan of our own making may even seem to make sense because in our own minds, we are great in our own minds. Many people suffer from delusions of grandeur and they don't even know it because they don't know what delusions of grandeur is. Right? Here's what Moses did. He chose God's plan over his own because recognizing this is a very important point in your decision making. Trying to improve God's plan by substituting our own is ultimate futility. In other words, God tells Abraham, all right, I'm going to give you a son. Sarah comes in, tries to improve God's plan. Need I say more? Look at this. It's important to know, however difficult for us, our plans must yield to God's plans. I don't care how difficult it is. I don't care how hard it is. If you want to make the right decisions, now you can do what you want to do because he made us all free will moral agents, right? You can do what you want to do. But if you want to make the right decisions, I don't care how difficult it is, our plans must yield to his plans. If we're going to make the right decision, number one, you've got to choose God's plan over your own. Number two, if you're going to make the right decisions, you must choose to be authentic over being prestigious. Ooh, I'm going to get a little messy right here. I'm all right with it. You must choose authenticity over prestige if you're going to make the right decisions. One of the best decisions anyone could make in this life is to be a person of authenticity and not a fraudulent, perpetrating, temporary counterfeit. Woo! Yeah, you've got, if you're going to make right decisions, the one thing you have to conclude on is being a person that chooses authenticity over prestige. Moses was not concerned about what people thought about him. Watch this, because in verse number 24, it says, when he became of age, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Now, from a worldly perspective, it looks here and appears that he was giving up everything, all the prestige of the royal family and being, Pharaoh's boy and all of this type stuff, because there are a lot of people who find themselves in dilemmas and in need of deliverance because they will not make a decision to choose authenticity over prestige. Moses wasn't concerned about what anybody thought about his decision. Look here, go ahead and type this in. I got to live with it. Moses says, I've got to live with it. Moses helps us understand here, if you're going to make the right decisions, and I feel like I'm preaching even if it's to myself, you're going to have to know that you must choose authenticity over prestige. The things that count greatly in this world are of little to no concern to God. And while you are so concerned and consumed with the things that count in this world, I think I ought to stop by here to tell you and pause for this cause and station identification. All that mess you thinking about, God ain't even concerned with. And you're making decisions based off of things that God is not even concerned with. Moses chose authenticity over prestige. Ultimately, what we have to do is this. We all have to settle the question of our own identity. That's the thing. That's where, and listen, I do my very best to try to edify the people of God. I don't try to shout you too much. You can get the shouting from you can go to a whole lot of other programming and get a lot of shouting, and that's good. And there's sometimes I like to have shouting messages too. But for me, you know what? I have made the decision that my preaching and my teaching is going to have some fundamental foundational principles that you can live on and live by when the winds and the waves and the hail of this world begin to hit you upside your head. That hucking and bucking and jumping and shouting and waving and all, that ain't gonna do you no good if you ain't got that word hidden off in your heart to where you know, like Moses did, I choose God's plan over my own. I choose authenticity over prestige. When you know that you can stand on the principles of your faith because you have decided that greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world, and the God of this world is lesser than the master of the universe. Ultimately, we all have to settle the question of our own identity. Who am I? Who are we? And the answer is that I'm God's child. The answer is that I'm God's, not just his creation, but I'm his child. I don't have time to unpack what it means to be God's child. You who are parents, you who are aunts and uncles, and those who have young ones and little ones under the supervision of yourselves, or you have any caretaking responsibilities for them, you know what you would do for that child. Now imagine what God will do for you. Ultimately, we have to answer the question, who am I? Am I really going to be more concerned about what they think? More so than I'm concerned about who he is and who I am? My identity is set. I'm God's child. Moses understood that. And he said, I will not be called by another's name. I want to be identified with the one in whom I know, trust, and believe. Notice Moses wasn't a grown man, but he had become of age because he had been reared in the atmosphere of faith. And he had to sit there and recognize, wait a minute, I can't be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter because I'm not. And that's a lot of us have some identity problems and some authenticity problems because we're allowing ourselves to be called by names that we're not. Moses says, I can't be called by this name because that's not who I am, right? So if we're going to make decisions on a daily basis, decisions, we have to make decisions every day. So since we have to make decisions every day, it seems like we ought to figure out a way to make the right decision. First decision Moses made, I already told you. What he did was he chose God's plan over his. The second decision was he chose to be authentic over prestigious. There are a lot of people who are making bad decisions because you're concerned about the prestige. And Moses says, I don't care about the prestige. I care about being authentic. Because Moses says, I don't just quote the scripture, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I believe that, right? And so with that in mind, last couple of things here, you got to choose self-denial over pleasure. That's where a lot of people run into problems when it comes to decision making. Look at verse number 25. Let me hurry and walk through the text. Verse number 25. It says, second decision. The first decision he refused. The second decision right here. He's choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. His first decision, he refused. His second decision, he made a choice. Because let's tell the truth, y'all, sin is fun. Don't lie. Sin is fun. Stop trying to act like, when people out in the world, I don't know why they're out there doing all this and doing all that. Well, before you got saved, you were having a blast and a ball too. And really, to be honest with you, I don't know why people stop having fun when they get saved. I don't know why people stop, remembering how to relax. And just, it's amazing to me on how some people get saved, man, and they just forget how to live. But what we're talking about here is that Moses chose self-denial over pleasure. And sin is fun, right? That may sound shocking to a lot of y'all, but it's true. Let's just tell the truth. Otherwise, people wouldn't do it, right? I'm not a rocket scientist, but I figured out. It's fun only for a season, though. That's the problem, see? It's fun for only a season. And the price that we have to pay later on ain't fun at all. Listen, sin is usually the easiest choice to make. But here's the thing. Solomon said in Proverbs, there is a way that seemeth right unto man, but to the end thereof is destruction. Because here's what I want you to know. The path of least resistance is often a deadly road. And many lives have been ruined by the inability to say no. That's a decision, y'all. By the inability to say no to that which is dishonorable. And here's the thing I want you to see here. When Moses chose rather self-denial over pleasure, he understood that I would rather die today and live tomorrow than live today and die forever. Whew. Last point, I'm done. I'm out of time as it is. Moses, number one, let me remind you, those of you that are scribing for me, how do you make good decisions? If we have to make decisions on a daily basis, how do you make good decisions? Number one, I'll remind you, you've got to choose God's plan over your own, right? Number two, you have to be willing to be authentic more than prestigious. Ooh. Number three, you have to choose self-denial over pleasure. And then here's the last thing, and then I'm done today. And I hope that you have been blessed by what's been shared with you. And I hope that I'm challenging and charging your minds to the point to where you're changing them about some of the decision-making processes, understanding that every day requires a decision, right? But we just want to know, what can we use as a formula to make good decisions? Not always the right ones, but at least make good ones, right? The last thing is this. Moses chose heavenly rewards over earthly riches. Somebody says, now, what does that have to do with making a good decision to choose heavenly rewards over earthly riches? Well, it's very important to understand that this world will offer you a whole lot, but it will come at the detriment and potential compromise of even greater later. Moses chose heavenly rewards over earthly riches. Can I show you in the text? Right there in verse number 26, look at it. It says this, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. Most people make bad decisions because they get caught up on looking at what's in front of them instead of looking to what's ahead of them. Because many people want not salvation, they want solution. And they want, just get me out of this right now. I don't care what you do later on. I don't care what the consequences are later. Just get me out of this right now. And the killer is, if you would have just sat there for just a little while longer, then the sustenance would have been in place. Because in Pharaoh's house, y'all know it, Moses would have had all the riches a man could have ever wanted. in Pharaoh's house. Look at the opulence of those pyramids. You know how those things look, right? Moses could have had all that wealth. Moses could have been buried there in one of those magnificent tombs. You know, they were the first ones to embalm, right? Instead, guess what, y'all? Moses wound up, I'm fast forwarding the story to the Hebrew writer. He says, man, Moses wound up buried in an unmarked grave on a lonely hill in the desert. But guess what, y'all? Still, he made the right choice. Can I tell you why Moses, buried in an unmarked grave on a lonely hill in the desert, was the right choice? Oh, it doesn't look like it to you. It doesn't look like it to many people's eyes. But at least at that funeral, God presided. God presided at Moses' funeral. And let me bring this thing to a close, because here's the bottom line, y'all. All of us are faced with choices. If I could tell you today, Jesus was faced with choices. He was faced with decisions. He was faced with the decision, do I choose my will over his will? Y'all see this right here? He was faced with the decision to determine, do I choose authenticity over prestige? He was faced with the decision, do I choose self-denial over pleasure? He was faced with the decision in the Garden of Gethsemane where he says, do I choose heavenly rewards over earthly riches? Jesus was faced with a decision. And here it is. I want you to understand that when we talk about him being faced with the decision, he says that I'm well acquainted with your afflictions. I know that you have faced decisions too, but I also have faced decisions. And it was in the Garden of Gethsemane where he decided to die. Most people say it was on Calvary's hill that he decided to die, but no, he decided to die in the Garden of Gethsemane. And written over the fundamental ones, these choices and decisions that we have to make, are these words: who chooseth me must give and hazard all he has. Jesus said it like this: whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will seek it. But he also said, seek ye first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. You can be fulfilled. That's the point I'm trying to make. Remember, the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your decisions. Yep. Fulfillment is yours for the taking. The problem is, the choice is up to you. I can't help but to start thinking back when I was a young boy, back in several of the good old Baptist churches. I could hear Deacon Troy and Deacon Green. I could hear them strike out in a song, and they would say, the road is rough and the going gets tough. The hills, they're hard to climb. But I started out a long time ago, and there is no doubt in my mind, I've decided to make Jesus my choice. Why have I decided to make him my choice? Because he decided to make me his. And today, all I want to tell you is that whatever decisions you have to make, understand that they will not be made until you make them. But when you're making them, at least know how to make the good ones. Because every day we are faced with decisions, decisions, decisions.